Welcome to Radical Personal Finance, a show dedicated to providing you with the knowledge, skills, insight, and encouragement you need to live a rich and meaningful life now while building a plan for financial freedom in 10 years or less. My name is Joshua Sheets. I'm your host, and today I'm going to bring peace and harmony to your life and to your culture by explaining why boomer advice still works in a Zoomer age. Now, here, of course, I'm talking about the baby boomers. And if you're involved in basically the broader discussion in our culture, perhaps you are aware that there is quite a bit of an argument that goes on between the insights and approaches and ideas that baby boomers have on a variety of topics, ways to get ahead, and the actual reality that Zoomers complain incessantly about, saying, well, you just don't understand and your advice is irrelevant. And in today's podcast, I'm going to try to explain to you why the boomer advice is still relevant, even though in reality, things have indeed changed. Because in my experience, there are misconceptions on both sides. The complaint that Zoomers make about boomers is that boomers don't understand how the world is today, that boomers had a totally different world, a totally different economy, a totally different set of realities that they lived in. And so that was why they got ahead, because everything was structured better for them. Meanwhile, the boomers look at the Zoomers and they have a set of complaints. Well, kids these days just aren't doing what should be done. And I'd like to suggest that they're both correct, meaning that there are good and genuine reasons for each of their complaints. But I want to come along as an elder millennial and try to basically bring people together and say, listen, guys, let's bring some peace and harmony, and let me translate boomer speak into Zoomer speak and vice versa, and let's see if we can figure this thing out. So that's what we're in for today. Let me give you an example, because I'd like to go through some of the kinds of advice that really anger most people and explain why, in reality, we can take this advice if we'll just simply adjust it. So a boomer might say something like this in an angry tweet. If you want to get a job, just walk in the front door, ask to speak to the manager, look him in the eye, shake him by the hand him your resume, and ask for a job. And a Zoomer who's just spent the last week submitting 100 applications for 100 different jobs and heard nothing back from each and every one of them will just slap himself in the face and say, are you so dumb as to think that you could just walk in the front door and shake him by the hand and get started? Well, I would say that in reality, both of these things are true. So first of all, let's interpret the boomer speak. When the boomer says, walk in the front door, look him in the eye, and shake him by the hand, the boomer is basically saying, you need to take initiative, right? You need to get up and do something. You need to take initiative, and you need to go out and you need to try. And if that means you need to go door to door and walk in and ask to speak to the manager and shake him by the hand and ask for a job, then that's what you need to do. See, boomers actually have, throughout their lifetime, had to do things. They've had to show initiative. Now, the way that you and I or our Zoomer friends might actually do that may be different. But the basic idea behind this is take initiative. Don't just do the same thing that everyone else does. Take initiative. So today, that might mean sending a cold email, making a cold phone call, sending lots of messages on LinkedIn. Who knows? But the idea is that if you really work hard to take initiative and make yourself stand out, then in many ways, you will be able to bring attention to yourself in a way that you can then go and work with. Now, a Zoomer might also say, well, no, listen, everything happens digitally. So the only way to do it, if I did walk in and shake the hand, they would tell me to put the resume in online. Well, that may be true. Or the Zoomer might say, well, that's just going to be pushy, right? It's all going to be dealt with in the system and we don't want to mess it up. That may be true. But a boomer will walk in and blow up the system. I don't mean physically. What I mean is that he'll recognize that, yes, there's the front door and there's the back door. And in reality, while it might be the case that many jobs might have that system, I can find a job that doesn't have that system, where I meet the person in charge and they just simply say, okay, you're hired, right? You've shown initiative. You've got chutzpah. We'll bring you in. We'll make it work. And so recognize what the boomer would say is you just need one job. You just need to get your foot in the door. You need to get something started, and you'll be able to go from there. Now, let's continue on this theme. What's a similar complaint that a Zoomer would have? A Zoomer would say, well, listen, that all works fine when there's lots of jobs available. So, you got out of school and you went and shook hands and you got yourself a big-time job right out of college. And I can't get any of those big-time jobs because there's too many people. Well, that is a legitimate complaint, right? In many cases, there are too many people. But what the boomer knows, the Zoomer doesn't, is that all you need is a chance. And you've got to start somewhere. And if you start somewhere, then as the years go by, things can happen quickly. When we are young, each year that passes of our life represents a very large amount of time. And so it's very hard to have a long time perspective when you are very young. When you are older, though, each year that passes represents an increasingly smaller fraction of our lives. And so we can more easily settle in to goals and approaches that take years at a time. I remember when I was 25 years old, the idea of making a 10-year plan, while I wanted to do it because I always embraced boomer advice and I did it, I couldn't imagine doing something that would take 10 years. Today, it's very easy for me to make a 10-year plan, just recognizing that 10 years is going to pass very quickly, and I might as well work on this 10-year plan. And so boomers have a perspective on the world that Zoomers lack. They have patience. They understand that, okay, this job might really stink, but one thing can lead to another very quickly, and yes, it may take 3 years. But after 3 years, that whole process of walk in and hand them your resume really can work. The other thing that boomers have is they have the perspective on things like hiring. When I was younger, I didn't have any idea how hard it was to find good employees. Today, I now understand very clearly that most business owners and executives, their most difficult job is to find and attract good employees. That's the hardest thing they do. And this costs them enormous amounts of money. And so while it may be very true that you'll walk into 9 offices out of 10, or 19 out of 20, or 99 out of 100, and practice the boomer logic and get nothing for it, the 1 out of 10, or the 1 out of 20, or the 1 out of 100, you will quickly open things up. The boomers are not wrong. Now, we should also recognize, because I want to be fairly even-handed, the Zoomers are not wrong on this one either, is that the job market has changed. The world of the past is dead and gone. And so the idea of company loyalty and being able to build a career, Zoomers are really hurting because in a gig economy, we have everything is fractionalized. And so it is really difficult. It is challenging. But just because it's difficult or challenging doesn't mean that there's not a pathway through it. People can sit back and complain against all kinds of things. Right now, it's very common for Zoomers to complain about never-ending discrimination. Everyone's upset about discrimination. Everybody from every background is upset about discrimination. Generally speaking, boomers are more likely to accept that discrimination is a fact of life, whereas it seems like Zoomers are more likely to whine about the discrimination that exists. Zoomers have been taught that discrimination is something that's bad, that we're eradicating from society. Boomers are more likely to accept that it just exists, so you have to work around it. You have to find a pathway through the discrimination that you face and just simply find a way to solve it. And so because boomers have basically consistently applied that practice to their life, in many ways they have succeeded. That's not to say that there aren't good reasons to look for structural changes. For example, one of the big brouhahas over the last few months in debates has been debate over the visa systems for temporary workers in the United States. And this is the case all around the world. What boomer advice means, though, in that context, I can't say what a boomer would say on this subject because they would probably agree with the Zoomers. But what the basic idea is, listen, buddy, you can't fix the system, but you can work within it or around it, and you can fix the system for you. All you need is a job. That's it. All you need is a business. So you need some place to get started and then go on from there to the next thing. And so my advice for the younger generation is recognize that what the boomers are trying to say here is demonstrate your initiative, demonstrate your distinctions. Do the hustle. Do something that's going to stand out. Market yourself. Make yourself visible. Show you're serious. Show that you can do this. And if you'll do that in whatever way needs to be done to work in the current moment, with whatever digital version of walk into the office and shake your hand and ask for a job needs to be applied, is totally fine. And what I would also point out, though, is that Zoomers very frequently suffer from strange fears that the boomers have mastered long ago due to a different set of life experiences. So it is true that the online world is prominent. And a Zoomer is very likely to sit back in his chair and say, well, let me send out 100 emails. 100 emails is a good place to start. Meanwhile, guess what? Nobody does what the boomers say to do. Nobody's walking in the door. Nobody's making the phone call. Why? Well, we're scared. The younger people, we're scared to walk in the door. We're scared to make the phone call. So try to always do what no one else is doing. And so if you're a Zoomer, don't just write off the boomer complaint here. Don't just write off the boomer logic and say, it doesn't work anymore. Try to think about it and give it a shot. And if you find out that, you know what, that really doesn't work now, adjust, adapt. Try to figure out what's the wisdom in that advice that could work if I adapted it. Now let's go on. What other complaints might there be? Well, boomer advice. Well, work hard and you'll get ahead, right? And what does a Zoomer say? Well, hard work just doesn't work, right? Wages haven't budged since the 70s. If we adjust for inflation, minimum wage hasn't changed. And, CEOs make hundreds of times what their workers do, and it just never ending goes up, and workers just get crushed. Loyalty's a trap, not a ladder, things like that. Is this true? Well, sure, it's true, right? We can see the data. We can see that it is true. But what is the boomer actually saying, right? Well, basically, as I would interpret this, being your millennial translator, the boomer is saying that, all right, I can't guarantee that you're going to get ahead in hard work, but you got to control what you can control, and you got to do what might work. And so hustling, right? Working hard is one thing that you can control. Now, working hard at a job is absolutely necessary, but that should be something that is expressed to every area of your life. So working hard on yourself and building your skills and building your reputation and working hard to connect to people and build friends, that hustle, effort works. And it may work differently and look different in this year versus how it looked 50 years ago, but it still really is key to work hard. And the person who works hard at least has the confidence of knowing that he's doing the minimum that's necessary to get ahead. It may still be the case that you need to find other things, but to add into that, other skills. And it may be the case that boomers didn't need other skills, that you could have just gone and gotten a job working at the local mill and worked hard and put in your time and climbed the ladder. But that is still a necessary way to get ahead. And again, what boomers understand is that hard work pays off. It compounds. And that in the fullness of time, the world has a way of leveling itself out. And that in general, most of the time, you get back what you put in. And so you may work really hard now and get nothing, make no progress. But over the course of the coming years, things tend to happen. And you tend to wind up reaping what you have sown. Now, we could go to a whole lot of other areas, right? So the boomers would say, go to college, get a degree, and you've got it, you're set for life. And a Zoomer will come back and say, this one's a big one, right? College just doesn't work, right? Here I am saddled up with nonstop debt. College costs have gone up enormously, and now I'm just loaded up with debt. And then we get a degree and we come out, we're all unemployed and working at the local fast food place. So what's true, right? What is necessary? Well, here I think there is clearly a big change in society. And the boomers, who grew up in a world in which a very small percentage of the population had a college degree, have a very different set of experiences than a Zoomer who lives in a world where a very large percentage of the population has a college degree. There is the distinction between those. But is that really the fundamental error? So all college degrees are not created equal. And one of the things that is an enormous problem is that various random college degrees are all considered to be a college degree and highly educated. So a person with a philosophy degree is compared to a person with a communications degree. Those things are wildly different. A person with a gender studies degree is compared with somebody with an engineering degree. Those things are wildly different. And they have a wildly different pay factor in the marketplace. And so if we wanted to adapt the boomer advice, then we could say, go to college, get a degree in something that's really hard and really in demand, and you'll be set for life. And guess what? In my experience as a financial planner, I would say that's broadly true. If you go to college and you get a degree in something that's really hard and in something that's really in demand, you can come out, you can do well in the job market, and that degree can pay off significantly financially over time. But we should also recognize, however, that it's not just a matter of the degree. This is in many cases best seen as a metaphor for education. Develop yourself, right? The boomer is saying, all right, college is one thing, but college is just the start. You may need to attend a boot camp. You may need to go through YouTube University. You may need to do all kinds of things in addition to that. But the man who piles up knowledge and who develops skills and lines up his credentials on the wall will always have a way of getting ahead. And when we use terms like set for life, recognize that the boomer is saying, over the course of decades. Boomers don't think in terms of months and years like Zoomers do. Boomers think in terms of decades. They're older, they have more of a perspective, and they've also walked this pathway before. If you look at wealth building, very rarely does any generation start to actually build wealth until it's in its 40s. And the biggest decade for wealth building is when you're in your 50s. So if you're 29 years old and you're frustrated with life and you don't have 2 cents to rub together, guess what? Welcome to the common, normal experience of life. The other side of thinking that somehow by 30 I'm going to be magically rich, that is very abnormal and requires a very unusual bit of experience to actually accomplish. What about, well, go out, buy a house and get started on life, right? House is a great investment, so go and buy the house. What does the Zoomer complain about that? Well, listen, Boomer, you just don't understand, right? Median home prices are hundreds of thousands of dollars, $400,000 now compared to $25,000 when you were this age, right? That's 8 times the average income instead of back then you had 8 times the average income instead of 10 to 12 times now. And we have piles of student loan debt and rent is eating up our income. We can't save for a down payment and our interest rates are through the roof, yada, yada, yada. Okay? That's what the Zoomer says. Is there anything wrong about that? The answer is no. That's all exactly correct. That yes, it is true that median home prices are much higher, especially when adjusted for income, that they are higher, and that young people are more indebted than past generations, and that rent is really expensive. And a boomer might say, though, okay, we can apply some time. But I think what the boomer would say is, well, that's really just because you want to live in Austin, Texas, or in downtown New York City, or in urban Atlanta, or downtown Seattle, or any number of hundreds of cities around the country and around the world. Guess what? If you go to upstate New York, or if you go to rural Louisiana, or you go to New Mexico, or any number of thousands of towns, you can buy houses that are way cheaper than they've ever been. And so the Zoomer is sitting there looking and saying, well, I'm just completely justified in my complaints. And the Boomer would probably be the person to say, I'm going to go get me one of these houses that are $50,000 and under and just go get one of those. If you look at house prices in Iowa and Ohio and Indiana, all across the Midwest, these are great housing markets where they're very affordable. And what'll happen, as happens in every market, is that when the pain gets so significant, people will finally change their behavior. And I think we're right on the cusp of that. You're seeing a lot of people now who are changing and recognizing, the friend's dream of moving to downtown New York. Maybe I'll just live in Ohio after all. Ohio is a great place, by the way. So recognize that the boomer's not wrong because the boomer would do things differently. One of the challenges that Zoomers have is that they have grown up surrounded by nonstop affluence. Nonstop affluence. And so younger generations, we have a very distorted view of what is normal in life, right? We can go to the avocado toast thing. This was a couple years ago, right? But stop buying avocado toast and save up for a house instead. Well, first of all, we should translate this, right? It wasn't, so the Zoomer complaint about these kinds of save money, stop spending money, is a Zoomer says, listen, that's not the problem. The problem is that rent's too high and groceries cost too much and restaurants are too high and health insurance costs too much. And so me saving on my avocado toast doesn't actually change anything. Okay, that may be true, but the boomer response is every little bit matters. And basically, it's a metaphor for how small lifestyle changes really can add up over time. And what happens is, whether it's avocado toast or fancy coffee and, lattes and things like that, what happens is that the younger generation tends to think these things are normal. If you've grown up in a world in which getting a daily avocado toast or getting a daily latte is normal, that's your frame of reference for normal. The boomer grew up in a world where he never would have dreamed of buying a coffee out and about because at that time fancy coffee shops didn't exist, and he brought a lunch to work every single day. And so these things that are totally normal for a younger generation are seen as an extravagance by an older generation. Well, if you change your perspective, then you can start to enjoy some of the savings associated with them. A $5 latte is still a $5 latte. These days, it's just a $5 coffee, right? Just a standard coffee in many cases is a $5 coffee. When you can make a 15-cent coffee, there's a big distinction there. What I'll tell you, though, if you're a Zoomer, is if instead of complaining about this stuff, if you really focused in on it, you would be able to create for yourself the reputation of someone who pays attention to little details. And the boomers are always looking to see if somebody is smart enough to pay attention and do something about it. When you complain as a Zoomer and you say, well, boomer, you don't understand. You just don't understand. After there's a complete structural change in the economy and it just doesn't work anymore. When you're a complainer, you take the people who are old, who have power, who have money, who have advice, who have connections, and you offend them at their core, and you basically demonstrate yourself to be worthless. Worthless to them and not deserving of their time and their energy. One of the stupidest things that young people can do is offend people who have power, who have money, who have experience, who have wisdom, and who have insight. That's a really stupid way to go about life. A much better way to approach life when you're young is to be teachable, to be a learner, to be a student, to be an implementer and a practitioner. Now, there are times in which you're going to get advice that doesn't really work. But then you just have to say, hey, Mr. Boomer, how could I adapt what you're saying to me in a way that would make sense? How could I feel like things have changed a lot. What are you really saying? If you're saying, go get a house, I don't really see how I can afford it. Can you help me? And that's a good way to have a productive conversation. But what is the Zoomer's kind of natural urge? Okay, boomer, ignore the advice and move on with life. When you get to be older, you start to look at people who are young and who are stupid, and start to just say, well, they're young and stupid, but life will straighten them out. I'm not so young and I'm not so stupid anymore. I'm going to go and spend my time where it really pays off. And that's honestly what pains me the most. It's not that there aren't lessons that need to go both ways. The boomers inherited a world from their parents that is very different than the world of the Zoomers. And that difference is probably totally natural, right? There seems to be a cyclical nature to human affairs. We go through seasons. We go through generations. We go through seasons. It may be the saeculum, right? The 100-year or basically span of a man's lifetime. Maybe the saeculum that's talked about, fourth turning is what popularized that most. Maybe just seasons of life, right? Spring, summer, fall, winter. But we tend to go through seasons. And basically, I think we're always reacting against those that came before us. And so there is a big difference between a boomer and a Zoomer. And there is a big difference between the world of the boomer and the Zoomer. But the way to get ahead and to really solve things is you're not well served by just assuming that all those with a different experience than you have are ignorant losers. Rather, opening up a good conversation and a respectful dialogue is really the key. It seems like these errors are almost determined by fate, right? Determined by generational fate. That the young tend to not think that the advice of the elder is worthy of their time, and the old tend to not think that the young have anything useful to say. So they seem to speak a common language and yet be divided by disrespect for one another. Well, I'm your friendly millennial wanting to bring you together. And for what it's worth, what has always worked well for me is to try to be somebody who listens really carefully to the advice of an elder and thinks and tries really, really hard to interpret that advice for whatever the current context is. It's fine to take advice. It's fine to not implement advice, but a wise man will listen to advice and then think about the meaning behind the advice and then try to interpret that for his situation, for the peculiarities of his actual experience or his actual problems. And sometimes you find wisdom, and sometimes you don't. And if you don't, you just respectfully move on. And when you do, you often have a breakthrough. Meanwhile, as we get older, we need to be really careful to listen very carefully and very respectfully to those who are younger. Because those who are younger bring value to us as we age. The world should function in a way that generations work together in an integrated format, because the strengths of each generation tend to offset the weaknesses of a different generation. The old usually lose strength and vigor. What do the young have in surplus? Strength and vigor. The young tend to lack wisdom and perspective. Your brain basically can't even be relied on until you're 30 years old. Scientifically, medically. It's one of the things I try to tell young people is I say, listen, if you want to get a tattoo, if you want to drink alcohol, great. Do drugs, whatever, great. Do it. Do it when you're 30 years old. Wait until you're 30 and then do it, because you can't trust yourself and you can't even trust the biological maturity of your brain until you're about 30 years old. So the young often have strength and vigor, but they lack wisdom and perspective. The old lack strength and vigor, but they have wisdom and perspective. And when you bring these together, you get something magical, something absolutely magical. But sniping at each other really isn't going to work. It really doesn't set a good foundation, a good tone for our collective progress. I think fundamentally, you could take a boomer, turn him back 50 years, plop him down in today's world, and more or less, he would tend to succeed to the same level that he succeeded back then. I don't see any reason why, on the whole, that kind of success is not possible. Now, it may be more difficult. What I would say is, yes, it may be more difficult, but we could adapt that just a little bit and say there would be a different set of pathways, right? The specific pathways, the specific jobs, the specific decisions that the boomer made when he was young, I think would be different than the specific pathways that he would make today if he had a Zoomer's experience. But on the whole, success is possible. I think I had a bunch of other examples, and I'm going to not go through all of them, but I was thinking about relationships. I think where there's actually been the biggest structural change in the world for young people is not in terms of prices of houses or cost of college tuition or prices of avocado toast, but rather in the dating marketplace and the ease with which people get married. I've spent a lot of time working on those problems, and it's very difficult, right? The situation with me, with all my old married friends, I don't think any of us have any desire to ever be thrown back into the current dating marketplace. It's very, very challenging. And I spent a lot of time talking to young men, listening to young men, thinking about talking to young women, listening to them, trying to understand what is working and what isn't working currently. I spent a lot of time trying to understand. And I think that that is the area where I would say there are the clearest changes and distinctions from where they were before. But the thing that I always observe is that especially highlighted in the world of dating and marriage is this: you only need one. You only need one spouse. So maybe the boomer had to go through, 19 girls before he found the 20th that was a good fit and would say yes to his marriage proposal. And maybe the Zoomer has to go through 49 girls before he finds the 50th who will say yes to him. Okay. So we know the price. The price is 50 versus 20. The point remains that all you need is one. And it's basically the same on almost every level of advice. All you need is one job, one place where you can scratch your way in and get a toehold and get started. And then once you're employed, then you can work on to get better employed when you're able to. And you can improve your situation day by day, year by year. All you need is one job. All you need is one opportunity. All you need is one down payment for a house. And maybe it takes you 4 years to save the down payment, where it took the boomer 2 years. Okay, well, now we know that the price of entry is harder. But all you need is one. On the whole, markets are efficient. They revert to where they really should be. Housing markets are efficient. Job markets are efficient. Any kind of inefficiency will tend to be smoothed out by the overall market. Marriage markets are efficient. It'll all get smoothed out in time. But meanwhile, you are not a victim of the market, of the society. Rather, you are one who simply needs to face the reality of where you are, learn from the strategies that have worked in the past, and then seek to say, which strategies could I apply now? And then keep applying that thinking process until you find something that works. I hope Joshua's little peaceful message of the day is useful to you. I would really love to see peace come between generations, between peoples of all experiences. I could have done this between any groupings, right? Different groupings of society have very different experiences. But on the whole, there are a few basic strategies that can be employed on every level. And when you employ those, you see they work. With finance, that's where I try to spend most of my time, but I wind up in this kind of personal development stuff because it so influences finances. And so a strategy like showing initiative, being creative, being gritty, right? Following through. Those are the key elements of boomer advice that are necessary. It's not the specific of walk in, shake them by the hand, and look them in the eye and ask for a job. Although I'm going to be here as the guy who actually sides mostly with the boomers, that when you live in a world in which everyone else is sending in a resume online and getting no response, probably the walk in the front door, ask to speak to the owner, and hey, I need a job, might have better results than you otherwise think.